Mhm. Hmm.
Okay,
Okay, yeah, we should be recording now, and so I'll just start
great.
presenting. We should be good.
Okay, so just everybody take a minute or two here for what are the assets of the region that could promote sustainable manufacturing?
Should I weigh in?
Just click on that link that Molly dropped in the chat, and you should see a form on your web browser. Getting some good responses here. And this is kind of just to help us begin to think about what are those products we could make here in a sustainable way. And we will use this later on to narrow down Reimagine's work as we move forward. Okay. Some interesting items here. We'll maybe pick up on them a bit in our discussion. Well, I think that's a good look at some great ideas, and we're obviously going to save this and share it. Why don't we kick off, Joe? We asked Joanne to be prepared to kind of kick us off a little bit and get the conversation going. So let me turn it over to Joanne. And I noticed some people are putting ideas in the chat, and we will capture those as well. So Joanne, oh, there you are. I was looking at.
I'm here. Thanks. Hello, everyone. I'll be brief just to put one idea, one example out there. And I think Stephen Lahat's going to talk a little bit about green steel too, as another example. That'll just prime our pump. But I'm in Beaver County, and one of the potentials that I've been researching with a task force here locally are biomaterials. And we're specifically motivated in Beaver County, as you may or may not know, we have a petrochemical plant here that is building and churning out plastic nurdles. So one of the things we're looking to really move beyond is the harmful plastics that are in our environment. So if we look to biomaterials, we have a lot of potentials. And one in particular that I'll just mention as an example, and there are many, many others, industrial hemp. And I think I saw on the Mentimeter, somebody put hemp into the Mentimeter. Industrial hemp is a material, it's an agricultural crop, as you may well know, or maybe not. It has regenerative properties, remediative properties. It has been around for thousands of years. Now, this is industrial hemp, which is different than what you might like to smoke, or even it's different than what you might like to put on your skin or take to get you to bed. It is not CBD, but rather it is an agricultural product that can actually be used in the manufacturing in the automobile industry. One example, BMW in Europe is making dashboards out of industrial hemp at the current time. It's also used in the packaging industry. So there's a lot of potentials in alternative to plastics with industrial hemp as a product. It's used in the biofuels industry and also used in textiles as and one of the biggest industries that really has taken off and even taken off here locally in Pennsylvania is the building industry. There are products called hempcrete. It's not a concrete, but it is a material made out of industrial hemp that is used in building homes and building commercial properties. And it's actually, there's a building in South Africa, in Johannesburg, that has I haven't seen it, but I've read that it is built entirely out of industrial hemp. So there's hemp wood, and there's hemp insulation, and there's hemp being used in lots of building capacities. So I just share that as a brief example to just kind of spur the thought. I think of the Appalachian region as a region with a lot of land. I think of the region with land that needs to be remediated. So there are potentials for industrial hemp. There is a roadblock currently, which should be cleared very soon. It is still classified with marijuana as a class, and I forget the number right now, but it's preventing investors, it's preventing farmers, it's preventing researchers from really diving into industrial hemp until at the federal level, it has the level of THC that does exist in a small amount in industrial hemp for those levels to be removed. And that will open up the pathways for industrial hemp. It's, I think the number is $500 billion industry. It has moved forward in Europe already, particularly in France. So we're a couple decades behind. I heard somebody in the earlier session say the United States makes everything better, cleaner, faster, smarter. I disagree. I think there are some European countries that are ahead of us in a number of different industries, but we have the capacity to catch up. So let me just stop there, pause there. And I don't know, Mark, if you want to just go to Stephen with Green Steel, or if you want to open up for questions, that's up to you.
Well, we can jump to Stephen. One thing I wanted to just comment on what you laid out there, Joanne, is you've got two different directions that both work in Appalachia. One is actually the production of the crop, and then the second is manufacturing products from the crop. And so you've got two different ways to go, both really in different sectors in the region,
Exactly.
drawing on different skill sets and different local economies. Stephen, what did you want to add in on green steel?
Well, what I want to emphasize with regards to green steel is that that is the elephant in the room. As you all know, once upon a time, Appalachia area, talking about Pennsylvania and Ohio and Indiana in particular, these places were where steel was made, and it employed many people, and it also mucked up the air, and because this was not green steel, and there was a reason why steel was made there, because the United States' largest source of iron is in Minnesota, and they would take the barges in Minnesota across the Great Lakes, and it would end up in places like Indiana and Ohio, etc. And then you would have the iron ore from which you would ultimately make the steel from. So the transportation piece, as well as the rail, everything was the perfect storm for making steel, but it was not in any green fashion. And if you ever went through Pittsburgh in the early 70s, it looks like Shanghai does now, which is ugly. Now it's beautiful, but it's not the steel capital of the universe anymore. So in order to have the best of both worlds, one has to do things green. And this is a tremendous opportunity for Appalachia, because not only do you have all the infrastructure that once upon a time made it the leader, but the road is clear. Nobody is really making green steel. There's only one mill in Sweden which is advanced enough in their green steel that they are providing sheet steel to Volvo and soon to Mercedes. Everyone else is talking 2 years out, and frankly speaking, it'll be much more than that. I've been involved in a project where they needed green steel rail. And I sort of scoured the world to find out who could provide green steel rail. And the fact of the matter is, the only company that had what they called green steel rail is a company in the United States, but it's not really green steel, but it's greener than most. And that was a local company, relatively speaking, Cleveland Cliffs. So that's good news. But theirs was, in essence, a a mill which was predicated on melting scrap and not using the most advanced methodologies, but they do have projects underway which are moving them in the right direction. The fact of the matter is, for example, Nippon Steel just acquired US Steel, and when asked about sustainability, they didn't have a clue what they were going to say about that. ArcelorMittal, one of the giant steel companies of the world, you look at their YouTube videos, it looks like they're making green steel everywhere. I spoke to their people. They're not making green steel anywhere. It's just the talk. So what does this mean for Appalachia? It means that you're not really behind. You have the perfect situation because you were the line leader once upon a time. You have the rail, you have the barges, you have the iron, you have the necessary ingredients and infrastructure. And best of all, what is green steel ultimately? It's a material that is going to create, Mark spoke about, well, what about the short and longer terms? Well, if you make green steel, what is you going to sell it to? The number one buyer of steel, period, is construction, which isn't going away. And steel, so construction is everywhere. Number two, it's going to certainly be automotive. Well, what could be more automotive than this area of states? And that's where all the cars have been historically. The majority of cars have historically been built. So the fact is there are captive markets. And then if you add green locomotives, go to a place like Erie, Pennsylvania, you have a perfect situation for selling to the biggest markets of steel. And you can do it at market rates. So it's just substitution. So this is simply, and not only that, but I've listened to different presentations by Wendy about basically giant plants that are just sitting there for a lawn, so to speak, not being used anymore. So to find a place for a green steel plant also should be a tremendous opportunity. And if you add in the Biden dollars and all the different programs that are in support of green industry, well, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that this is the perfect storm for this material. Problem is, there needs to be somebody who's going to sort of take the bull by the horns and put together a project like this.
Hey, Stephen, we've got a question in the chat just to sort of get everybody on the same. What constitutes green steel?
Okay, so green steel, let's say, starts at the beginning, which means it's using green electricity. Making steel uses a lot of electricity. So you need green electricity, which means you're going to get it from hydrogen, you're going to get it from water, in terms of like generating off the water, off tidals, etc. The electricity is not going to be based on fossil fuels. So that's one element. Also, the transportation of the different ingredients and the manufacture of the different ingredients in the steel itself have to take account of green as well. So, for example, we spoke about barges from Minnesota to places like Ohio, Indiana, et cetera. So those barges, it just so happens that green maritime is a very big deal these days, which not only talks about what you build your barges of, but how you propel them. And questions such as using hydrogen or using alternative fuels are already very large questions that a considerable amount of resources are being used. Not only that, but the Great Lakes commissioners, the port commissioners, have a program with an organization called Green Marine, which rewards maritime barge companies and others that use green technologies in calling on their ports. So I know I spoke to the port director in Milwaukee, for example. So again, the transportation, we call that Scope 3 emissions. So you have the materials, the ingredients, you have the transportation, and then you have the production itself. So one of the problems of an integrated steel mill is it takes coal, it cooks it, that makes it coke, and it uses these materials to create very, very high temperatures, like around 2000 degrees, in order to melt the iron and to make it into a slag, and ultimately to process that into steel, which is rolled into different products and different alloys, etc. So this question of getting those really hot temperatures to take the iron and turn it into steel, substituting out the coal the opportunity is there with hydrogen. Now, why is that relevant for the Appalachian region? Because Appalachia, like California, and I think 7 other places around the country have been designated as hydrogen hubs. That means that federal dollars are coming into these areas to support hydrogen industry big time and to create jobs in this industry. So in essence, the type of fuel to, let's call it a fuel, to create these high temperatures rather than burning coke to achieve is going to be substituted with green hydrogen, which is made in essence of water products, but it can be made away from the water as well. For example, waste to energy scenarios. So what I'm getting at is ultimately this question of green requires the energy sources as well as the ingredient materials and the production of energy later on in the process to all have a green nomenclature to it. Now, ultimately, once you have the steel product and you start to create steel bars and sheets, etc., it's very similar to the current situation. But to get to that point takes a lot of infrastructure change and technology, which means a lot of money in essence. But it's out there. I mean, there's been enough conversations by the steel mills that they know what they need to do, but it's right now, it's more like talking the talk rather than walking the talk. As I said, there's really only 1 mill in the world right now, and they're still not in commercial quantities that could do sheet steel, which would be a very important product. But there's a lot more to this, and having spoken to so many steel mills and a ground level, talking to people who are making it, who take the orders, there's a big difference between seeing YouTube videos by executive vice presidents and talking to the people who you call up and say, I have an order for steel. What do you got that could be called green steel, and why is it that way? We have a ways to go, and that creates the opportunity right now in Appalachia.
That's great. That's great. It seems to me I'm sort of thinking about this in terms of what would Reimagine have to start to look at, and that definition really helps in terms of, in some ways, green steel is no different than any other kind of green manufacturing, at breaking out the components and greening those up, if you will. And so that
Yes.
lets us think about, well, what would we have to do in this region to make this all possible? Carl, I see your hand is up. Why don't
Yeah,
you?
I just, I don't know whether it fits the definition given here of green or not, but we have a new steel mill that ground was broke for here in Aliquippa that comes under the category of green steel, I suppose. The raw material going in is scrap steel. Electric arc is used to heat it, and what comes out the other end is rebar and other construction steel. And it's supposed to be built over the next couple of years. A company from Boston is the one who we had here, and we had a groundbreaking ceremony. So, well, it's not here yet, but the plans are in the works. I put the link to the article from the Beaver County Times in the chat, and we're quite happy to see this because if we're making green steel, I mean, or making this kind of, first of all, uses up all the scrap we have around Beaver County, which if you fly over it, you see hidden in the woods, scrap, huge junkyards with nothing but scrap steel in them. And they keep growing because as automobiles die. But anyway, so the raw material is here to get rid of, and the whole world needs construction steel.
Let me comment on that, because that's a very important point. I am aware of that mill, and in fact, the Cleveland Cliffs mill that is doing the rail is using scrap. So why isn't that a good idea? I mean, it is a good idea, but it's not enough, because even though Pennsylvania has a lot of scrap, for instance, I know when I spoke to Cleveland Cliffs, the fact is there is a world shortage of scrap. There simply isn't enough to compare that to what we call an integrated mill of actually taking the iron ore, et cetera. So that is a positive way of making the steel, 100%, but it's capped. There's sort of a glass ceiling there because if you start to really look at the amount of steel needed for construction and for auto and locomotives and all those other things, scrap cannot provide enough to fill that gap. That's why there are integrated mills. The other point, which is very important, is besides there being a glass ceiling, is that there are technologies, even in using scrap steel, which create a certain amount of emissions. And there have been technologies that have been developed in Germany which recycle those emissions and turn them into electricity and other useful things rather than getting it into the air. The mill, which I understand is going to be done in Aleppo. I'm not saying you're right. Aliquippa. And I heard of that place when I actually started my career in the steel industry decades ago. But then I became all sorts of other things in the interim. But the point is that the situation is such that you end up with certain technology, and the technology which I heard for that particular mill is more or less like the mini mills, which I saw in effect when I was in the steel industry in the mid-70s, which is not a bad thing. It just means they're not using the advanced technology from the EU, which takes that degree of pollution from even the greener steel. We won't call it green steel as much as greener steel. 100% it's greener steel, but they don't incorporate that level of technology, which of course costs more money, to indeed make scrap steel into scrap steel, which is melted down and then pressed into new steel objects. They don't use that technology to further clean the air. So in essence, it's using somewhat old technology. It's sort of okay, but it's putting a cap. And I think for there to really be the kind of production like it was in the olden days, you're going to have to do integrated mills, which means you're going to have to spend a lot more money than using old technology. And it will pay off. There's no question about it. And now is the perfect storm for those kind of projects. So, this is not something for tomorrow. This is definitely something for today. So it is a good thing, Carl, but they could do much better. And it will create that many more jobs.
I'm one who grew up when they had open hearths and they tapped them. And I had to sweep what we called J&L pepper off the porch every day. My mom had me go out and do it. And God knows what it did to our lungs.
Right.
That's right.
So this is not going to be that. Thank God.
So we've got a couple of things we've talked about: industrial hemp and as a possibility, and a new approach to steel, which draws on an old strength of the region. What are some other ideas that people have? What projects are you all thinking of that we should take a look at?
Well, the one I like most, I'm not even that's green steel is not even the top of my agenda. I think one of our main resources are the rivers. And if you look at the history of manufacturing in the area, one of the first kinds of manufacturers that came up were the manufacture of vehicles to do transport on the rivers. And the rivers are a green method of transport if we can modernize our locks and dams, repair them all, modernize them all, and build the appropriate barges and whatnot for modern day, and get more and more of the transport of all kinds of materials out of 18-wheelers on the highways, and where we can use our rivers. I think that's one thing that we can do that is very important.
Okay, great. I see a couple.
Paul, I think you're.
I'll go to Eileen.
Hey, you all. Eileen Wohl. I'm the Offshore Energy Program Director with the Sierra Club Virginia chapter based in Norfolk, Virginia. Offshore wind, I would say, is an opportunity for what can be manufactured in Appalachia. There are over 8,000 parts in any one wind turbine, and obviously the larger parts need to be manufactured close to coastal areas where a number of projects. The Biden administration has a 30 gigawatts by 2030 a lot of projects along the Atlantic coast, in the Gulf Coast and also the Pacific Coast. So on both the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic Coast, tons and tons of projects, which is going to involve a whole lot of manufacturing. And these, like I said, 8,000 parts need to be manufactured for offshore wind. And this, some of these parts, like I said, are very large, but there are also a lot of very small parts that can be manufactured in a whole lot of places. But there's just going to be massive amount of manufacturing that needs to be done. The first generation of offshore wind projects are going to be largely European parts. But that transition has got to happen, not only to make it more affordable but also to make this be an industry and to make it happen. So I just wanted to bring that up as an opportunity to explore. It's definitely a very transformational type of industry, and there's going to be a lot of manufacturing associated with it.
That's great. One other thing that strikes me about that, Eileen, is I think people sometimes forget that the core of manufacturing in this region has always been parts.
Mm-hmm.
Metalworking to make the parts for any number of things. And although everybody always thinks of those single big plants in a city, go through, at least certainly in Ohio, and I think it's true in the other states, go into rural counties, smaller towns and cities, and there's one manufacturing plant, the factory, and it makes parts for something. And it's a lot of local business, it's locally owned, and it employs local folks. So that's a great suggestion.
Yeah. Well, and every wind turbine also includes an elevator. And think of all the parts that go into making an elevator. So there's going to be a massive number of more elevators that need to be produced. One of the questions here is European companies manufacturing turbine parts looking to sites in the United States. Yes, they are. The big ones are looking, like Siemens Gamesa right now is looking at manufacturing some of the turbine blades. So, but all the European companies so far that I know of are looking to set up manufacturing sites close to the coast because they are building massively huge things, like turbine towers and turbine blades and turbine foundations.
Great.
Eileen, also.
Oh, hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, because I've had so many mic problems with this computer lately, so I'm trying something new. Yes, I'm a rural caucus chair for the Ohio Democratic Party. I'm also a candidate for the Ohio House. I sit on the board of the Ohio Public Banking Coalition, and I'm also an advisor for the National Infrastructure Bank. And we got Greg Landsman and Marcy Kaptur to sign on the resolution in Congress right now that would build a national infrastructure bank, raising almost $5 trillion. And we could probably have a project in every county in every state. This is the model that we used during the Depression. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation financed all of the New Deal programs. You're taking private money for public purposes. So we want to bring that back, what we had before, and that could address a lot of the issues that we're talking about with the Appalachia, programs. The one I did talk about I mentioned the hemp. I was the one that brought that in. I've been pushing for hemp for years as a candidate. I think we could be growing industrial hemp up and down the waterways on the western side of Ohio. That could help with the Great Lakes Basin Initiative, and you ship that product down to southern Ohio for manufacturing into all kinds of industrial products like Joanne already previously mentioned. The other thing we could be doing in Appalachia, under the tri-state agreement that was signed between Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia in 2015, it was mostly for oil and gas purposes. But there is a framework in that agreement by which the 3 states can operate under for new manufacturing purposes. And the one thing that I see is with the old fracked wells that are abandoned can be repurposed for geothermal purposes. This is a model that is being used in explored in other states and countries. And I think that it presents a great opportunity for manufacturing in Appalachia. I push this forward because, I mean, again, one of the things that we're facing here in Ohio is the Intel project. That could be a giant sucking sound, to use Perosa words, taking all of your talent out of Appalachia, and it's going to go gravitate towards Central Ohio. We want to prevent that. You've got to keep the machine tool capabilities and manufacturing capabilities in that state, in those areas. They're aging out. These counties are the fastest to shrink in this area, and we've got to address that. So I've come up with some ideas. These are the campaign ideas I've had. I've been pushing for years, and I'm running for state office to help implement that. State public bank, a national infrastructure bank, can help a lot of the financing of these programs. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Craig. Patty, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, everybody. My name is Patty Miller. I'm calling in from Berkeley County, West Virginia, in the Eastern Panhandle. And all of these things you're talking about are so sexy. I work with small acre farms and food businesses. And there's some low-hanging fruit here. And some, well, long and short of it is we're driving towards regenerative ag and local sustainability and manufacturing. Manufacturing used to be big here in the Eastern Panhandle because our growing conditions are so favorable. We've got everything going on here, but there's nothing supporting a plan for an overall food system that would let us get our farmers who are starving hooked up with institutional purchasing. And there's so many gaps to be created on this end and work being done on the healthcare end. But I believe this is the low-hanging fruit that will equip West Virginia to do everything else we're doing here. The potential is unbelievable. We've got all the right natural resources, and we can solve food deserts. There shouldn't be any of those in Appalachia. We've got the will to do it. We don't have the structure. It's intimidating even on this call to bring this up. I work with this through networks at a very hyper local level and through Central Appalachia. There are ways. One of the people on the call here, Wenatchee Corporation, is over here in the Eastern Panhandle, and they have big manufacturing dreams. But getting through all of it, the startup of the business, the regulatory environment, the financing, which isn't built for farmers, we're not square pegs. But we've got the will, we've got the talent, we've got the producers. We need to put some intention to it and put some money behind this. And we don't know what all you guys know in your stuff. And I grew up downwind of the steel mills in Buffalo on Lake Erie in the 70s. There was impact to all of us. So I'm for everything you're saying. I'm just saying, could we start with food and strengthen our communities? I hope we'll put some intention behind this because we need help out here. And thank you.
Yeah, no, I see a couple of comments in the chat chiming in with that. I'm jumping around a little bit, but I saw a comment from Wendy earlier, a suggestion that one of the things we could be making in the region is take advantage of all the tax incentives right now for LEED buildings to make the component parts necessary to do that construction. So it seems it's interesting to me. Wendy, you might want to say more about that.
The only thing I'll say is that I was talking to one of our researchers who is becoming LEED certified, and he said within 100 mile, you need to buy some of your green materials for your LEED building within a 100-mile radius. And I said, what kind of materials is that? And he said, well, like toilets. And I was like, hey, we have factories like that, clay factories, doors, sashes, etc., throughout Appalachia. We've served ourselves. This is a historic kind of a industry that we do provide. There's facilities in place, and now the tax incentives for the LEED structures stimulate activity. Ohio expects a huge rush of suppliers and reshoring manufacturers to come in to supply Intel. There's market demand with reshoring for this kind of product for which we already have factories.
Great. Stephen, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I do. Well, first of all, yeah, Patty, if you want to talk about agriculture, I'm, well, just to give you a background, I'm a director at Colton Alexander. All of our companies we deal with are sustainability companies, and we do involve ourselves with ag tech. And so I'd be delighted to speak with you further about that and see what we might be able to do that could be helpful to you. So please reach out to me. And so that's first of all. Secondly, with regards to call and the river, I think the river has tremendous amount of possibilities. For example, and this cuts into what Eileen was talking about with the offshore turbines, because I've seen presentations by folks that have the offshore turbines, and they're also capturing energy from the tidal of the water movement. And most interestingly, literally a few weeks ago, I spoke to one fellow that said he could capture electricity from moving water, like in a river, at like 4 miles an hour. So there's a tremendous opportunity to think in terms of those rivers, not only as transportation, but even as feeders for electricity, be it with turbines or be it with the tidals themselves. Additionally, Carl raised another issue, that is the question of infrastructure. And infrastructure, old bridges, old dams, etc. Well, literally within the last few weeks, I've been presented by a company that has technology which fixes and makes these old structures rejuvenated like for 100 more years. And so if there are people who have these projects, I have companies that I can introduce them to, and this might accelerate the development. The last thing I wanted to talk about is something that's been sort of a teaser for me, and this is very important for the area, and that is the idea of taking coal tailings and turning them into rare earth elements. I've heard there are studies at the University of West Virginia. I've even heard that some companies are doing this, but I've never spoken to a company that actually is taking this seriously and embarking on such a project. I'd be tremendously interested. My whole group would be interested in the financing and project development in that space, which I think is another elephant in the room if you're talking about Appalachia. Take all those coal tailings and turn them into rare earth elements. And what I've heard, just share this with you, the only company I know right now that's doing rare earth elements is in California, and they're shipping it to China for processing, which is what we don't want to do. The opportunity, the findings that are coming back from the coal tailings that are turned into rare earth elements from places like West Virginia are such that the product would be far superior to anything coming out of China or this California company. This is a tremendous opportunity, but I need to be connected to someone who's actually walking the talk and not just talking, because we're very excited about that as a project, and we'll be supportive in any way we can. That's all I wanted to say.
Always critical to be able to identify the money that will support this investment and the expansion. George, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mark. So I'm calling from Washington County, Ohio, and I'd like to ask a question more about the raw material than a manufactured product. So we are the largest recipient of brine waste. Brine waste, of course, the euphemism for the waste material from fracking, hydraulic fracturing for natural gas and oil. So I'm wondering if there's any thought to what this product might be used for in manufacturing. Certainly the toxicity would have to be reduced, radioactivity eliminated, but this is in such abundant supply and it's being pumped into the ground at some risk to aquifers. So it's a big problem here in Southeast Ohio. So I'm wondering if there's any way this can be formulated into some manufacturing purpose.
Great question. Somebody here happen to have the answer to that question? It's a great question.
No, but that can go on our research list, Mark, for,
Yep.
you know, our compilation of potential research. That's an excellent,
Yeah, the problem with a lot of that fracked water, it's highly radioactive.
Right.
The best thing I heard is you have these portable sites. They go out to the frack sites. They're processing the water there, and you're repurposing as much water as you can. So you deplete your usage on your rivers, lakes, things like that, where they normally bring the water out of. But there's always 10 to 20% residual that is so toxic, so radioactive that's what they're storing in the vertical wells. No,
Right.
you just got to get out of this. You got to get your natural gas and everything else eventually from renewable sources and stop doing this.
I can address some of the rare earth material questions if you want to do that.
Yeah, go for it, Station.
So I worked with the Department of Energy on the critical minerals. Recently, it was summer. So first, the California rare earth materials are open pit mining. The way that they are getting the rare earths out of Appalachia. So that's going to be West Virginia, Kentucky, Ohio specifically. Pennsylvania's in there as well. It is through the acid mine drainage. And I'm surprised that this is not as public information as it should. The primary benefit of extracting rare earths out of the existing acid mine drainage, it leaves behind clean water. You have to clean the acid mine from the material sitting in the acid mine drainage. It's almost like the acidity, the sulfur and the acidity, the pyrite, it separates over time in that a solution. So you don't have to mine. It's extremely I wouldn't say cost effective because we do not have demonstrations that are at commercial cost scales, and they also are not very open about what the exact costs are. At this point, people are carrying buckets of mud or sludge to a lab to see if they can get the processes together. There's a lot of money that the feds have allocated for this stuff, for the rare earths, because the rare earths coming out of the Appalachian region are considered heavy rare earths. So you have light rare earths and you have heavy. The big mines in China and Colorado are mostly the light. Heavy ones are what we need for perpetual motion batteries. They are required for wind. They're required for EVs. So they are in less supply and they bring in a very high market price. Now, one of the groups I saw on for this conference is the Interagency Development Working Group on Coal. That group is the one that is directly involved with funding projects for the rare earths. You can go to their website, join their web server or their web list, and get involved. Brian Anderson is the head of that group. He was the former head of the U.S. Department of Energy National Energy Technology Lab here in Morgantown. And feel free to reach out to him if you've got an idea. So stream restoration is big. Supposedly there's a production facility that's going in someplace outside of Wheeling. I don't know if that's going to happen. The ideas of using the waterways for barge or solar barge, whatever, to transport this is huge. They, as far as I understand, they have not evaluated looking at any production processes to final product. So they're only talking about creating an oxide. So that's all I've got.
Great. Well, it's exciting to talk about projects that would essentially take the waste that's been left behind by the extractive industry in this entire region and make those useful for future economies that are locally based and may actually build the economy, rebuild the economy, and do it in a way that's locally controlled as opposed to by the extractive industry that just moves the money away. George, I see your hand up. Is that from before or again?
I'm
Okay.
sorry, that's from before.
Okay, no problem. No problem. We've got about 5 minutes left before we're going to go back into a quick general session. So I think we have another shot at a Mentimeter to ask another question to try to pull together the things. So it's back.
Yes,
Where
it
we
should
were.
be the same link
Same
from
one.
earlier, but let me redrop that in the chat for folks.
Great.
Or if you look at the top of the screen, you also can type in that code at menti.com. It'll take you to the same place, but let me just grab the link. Where did it go?
Okay. So the question, when you get to it, as you can see here, is of the sustainable manufacturing ideas we discussed, or perhaps some we didn't get to, how would you prioritize them? So we're trying to figure out, as Reimagine Appalachia moves forward, we've got a great team of researchers to take a look at what are those things that make the most sense and what are the component parts of progress on those. So take a minute or two and sort of think about issues we raised or things that you thought of that we haven't raised. And let's do a little prioritization there of the sustainable manufacturing ideas. What priorities do you select for Reimagine to do research on and try to develop program work around?
Does that link seem to be working for folks? The same one from earlier? Did it switch to the, okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure it wasn't stuck on the first slide.
This is great. Any other additions to this people want to make? Very good.
Yeah, if you're having any trouble with the link or with participating, feel free to take yourself off mute and say it out loud as well. I can always add it to this later whenever we go to look at this.
Obviously, I'd like to add Steele, but I haven't figured out how to use your assistant yet. So.
Oh no.
Oh,
Okay.
I can type it in for him, Molly. Put Steele in there for.
Yeah.
I was going to say, looking at the first Mentimeter, Mark, and looking at this one, we don't have more time, but it'd be so interesting to look at the assets that we have in terms of and the priorities we're selecting, and are there some matches? And we can do some of that subsequently here, but that's why this capstone question to the first one is really interesting.
I will say that there's an opportunity here that I literally found out about today, and I can't really say more than just to state it, and that is the electric recharging stations are not working in the really cold climates today. And that is an invitation for some smart people, maybe at Ohio State or Cincinnati or Michigan or any of the other Midwest states to do something to address this, because this is one of the things that the United States government for sure has banked its money on. And all of a sudden, when you get extreme cold temperatures, you can't recharge your car. And it literally came up in the news service today. So I think that's a challenge there that somebody should address. And there will be a significant audience for it, considering how the EV market is growing. And interestingly, since China is a big EV market, wouldn't it be nice to do a little bit of reverse trade with them, since if we could come up with the chargers that they need for their cold climates, because they don't have them now, because we don't either.
Okay, folks, we're about to get bounced back to the main session. Thank you to everybody for participating in this, and we will follow up with folks and try to recruit you into helping us do the work. So thank you all